Video contains violent content, details that are not suitable for common perception. Please consider before watching. Chapter 236. The Disregard for the Embroidered Uniform Guard 5. Creak creak creak. The Jiak stone slab crumbled and dug down as if it were kneaded clay. Commander Si Wuriang of the Second Office, the assistant supervisor who hadn't held any particular expectations, couldn't hide his shock at the sight unfolding before his eyes. What is this? Based on his perception, Mok Jayongun's martial prowess was at the pinnacle stage of peak realm. Therefore, even at his best he had expected about 2.5 CUN. However, the result completely deviated from that expectation. He wasn't the only one surprised. The commanders of the other 5 offices also couldn't take their eyes off this sight, stopping the test midway. Creak creak creak. How was this possible? Mok Jayongun's 5 fingers, which had been relentlessly kneading and digging down the stone slab, eventually passed through it completely, dividing the Jiak stone slab into 6 long pieces. Thud. Thud thud. Commander Si Wuriang of the Second Office, whose head had lowered following these Jiak stone fragments rolling on the ground, was at a loss for words, dumbfounded. The training grounds, which had been engulfed in silence for a moment, soon buzzed with murmurs here and there. This is crazy. Did he just do that to the Jiak stone slab with his bare hands? How strong must his internal energy be to go beyond leaving a mark and do that? From the trainee's perspective, it truly felt monstrous. And this admiration naturally led to a comparison with someone. It was none other than both Zhu Wenxiang and that guy. What the hell are they? Are they complete monsters? Even the assistant supervisors are dumbfounded, can't you see? That's true. But still, doesn't Zhu Wenxiang, who completely shattered the Jiak stone slab, have stronger internal energy than that guy? You're right. Zhu Wenxiang completely destroyed it. Then, does Zhu Wenxiang remain in first place? It was utter chaos. However, the reactions of the commanders were even more serious than those of the trainees. When Zhu Wenxiang had shattered the Jiak stone slab, they were surprised that his internal energy had reached the level of an embroidered uniform guard commander or above, not a trainee. But this was even more shocking. What a monstrous fellow. All the commanders of the 6 offices shared the same thought. About half of the commanders gathered here could shatter the Jiak stone slab like Wenxiang did if they unleashed their ultimate techniques or pushed themselves to the limit. However, to do it like Mok Jayongun, advanced techniques were required. The internal energy had to be controlled to prevent it from dispersing in all directions, allowing it to dig down the Jiak stone while maintaining the shape of the 5 fingers. This was a high-level advanced technique. While the commanders recognized this, there were also trainees who couldn't help but be in awe of Mok Jayongun's advanced technique. They were Namgung Chenghian of the Namgung clan and Jiam Zhonghayan, a disciple of the Zhongnan sect. Unlike the trainees whose level was inferior, they were as dumbfounded as the commanders by the advanced technique Mok Jayongun had displayed. It's definitely not the level of a late-stage disciple. I think only Taoist priest Jian Munjia, the Grand Preceptor or the sect leader, could do this. Because they possessed outstanding martial arts and keen insight, they clearly realized the gap between Mok Jayongun and themselves just from this one advanced technique. Of course, there weren't only those who were purely in awe like them. Wei Buchong, who had learned martial arts from Gwi Saman of the Evil Alliance's Evil Sword sect, felt strong jealousy towards Mok Jayongun, who was receiving the focus of attention following Zhu Wenxiang. Gur. Why are these guys appearing one after another? His plan to receive high scores in the embroidered uniform guard selection process regardless of being pre-selected and gain the attention of everyone, including His Highness Prince Jiaongjin, was gradually falling apart. As a result, his anger towards Zhu Wenxiang and Mok Jayongun, whom he considered to have ruined it, naturally grew. I'm amazed. To think they reached such a level at that young age. Commander Chai Hosong, one of the overall supervisors, clicked his tongue. Even he, who had reached the pinnacle stage of transcendent realm, could forcefully display the advanced technique shown by that late-stage disciple from the Heaven and Earth Society if he tried. However, it was questionable whether he could do it with all 5 fingers like that. It was an advanced technique that required the ability to control internal energy as naturally as breathing. To have cultivated such monsters. Indeed, it was characteristic of the Heaven and Earth Society, one of the 3 forces holding hegemony over the martial arts world. No one present could assess the level of that fellow. Perhaps even Commander Seo Yeren had a similar thought. Huh. Looking beside him, he saw Seo Yeren frowning and staring at the disciple from the Heaven and Earth Society. It was the first time he had seen her with such a serious expression. At this, Commander Chai Hosong carefully called out to her. Commander Seo. Yes. She replied, slightly startled and trembling. To her, Commander Chai Hosong clicked his tongue and said, It's truly absurd, isn't it? It is. It seems another monster has entered the 6 office's officials. It's as shocking as when you and the commander of the 5th office joined. Commander Seo Yeren had also amazed everyone at the time. At the mere age of her early 20s as a woman, she had demonstrated such incredible capabilities to secure the position of commander, the pinnacle of the 6 office's officials. However, that monster sent by the Heaven and Earth Society was even younger than them. He hadn't even reached his early 20s yet. That meant his potential for development was boundless. Half listening to Commander Chai Hosong's exclamations, Commander Seo Yeren shifted her gaze somewhere. It was none other than Zhu Wenxiang who was in the successful group. As expected, you felt it too. Just like her, Zhu Wenxiang also had a serious expression. Zhu Wenxiang couldn't take his eyes off the chilling sensation rising from his spine. The sensation of his fingertips turning cold was a first for him. What was that just now? The moment Mok Jiangun from the Heaven and Earth Society placed his fingers on the stone slab, the energy within his body reacted extremely sensitively and activated on its own. As if it were being vigilant of something. It's like pitch black. It was difficult to explain this sensation. Nothing came to mind except that it was sinister and dark. While being engrossed in the unpleasant feeling, Mok Jiangun from the Heaven and Earth Society slowly turned his head, and before he knew it, he was looking at him. As a result, their eyes met directly. Zhu Wenxiang immediately furrowed his brows. That was because that fellow named Mok Jiangun was looking at him as if he found him interesting. Why was he looking at him with such eyes? It was a moment of puzzlement. Then Commander Si Wuriang of the 2nd office, who had been assessing him, shouted the result. Trainee Mok Jiangun. 5-point segmentation of the slab. First place. At the result that instantly replaced first place, the trainees buzzed with murmurs, unable to hide their confusion. Huh. What? First place. It's incredible, but isn't Zhu Wenxiang even more amazing? Why did this result come out? It was difficult for ordinary trainees who didn't know how challenging this advanced technique was to understand the result. Among the trainees, only a few top-ranked individuals could comprehend this outcome. Mok Jiangun, who had passed, calmly walked towards the successful group. And as he passed by Zhu Wenxiang, he whispered as if muttering, You had it hidden tightly in your middle danjian, not your lower danjian. Hearing those words, Zhu Wenxiang's pupils trembled slightly. He tried his best not to show any reaction, but Mok Jiangun didn't miss this fleeting moment. However, there was no time for a lengthy conversation now, so he just said that much and walked past him. Clench. On the other hand, Zhu Wenxiang clenched his fist tightly the moment Mok Jiangun passed by him. Siep Chun, who had been in front of Mok Jiangun, who had stood in the last row of the successful candidates, quietly slipped back and whispered to him, Well done, my lord. There was no hardship. He had merely crumbled a stone slab. To such Mok Jiangun, Siep Chun asked in a low voice as if puzzled, But my lord, didn't you showcase your skills too much? He had been curious about this anyway. Of course, to pass the embroidered uniform guard selection process, one had to be among the top-ranked. However, if Mok Jiangun had wanted to, he could have been among the top-ranked without necessarily displaying such an advanced technique, by adjusting his performance to a certain extent. But because of this, he was worried that he had unnecessarily drawn great attention. To his words, Mok Jiangun replied, A troublesome matter has arisen. A troublesome matter? Yes. Mok Jiangun recalled something that had happened a moment ago. Just a moment ago. As Mok Jiangun approached the Jiok stone slab to take the test, a voice reached his ears. So you're the one who fearlessly tried to harm that person. It was none other than the voice transmission technique. Mok Jiangun moved his eyes with narrowed eyes without showing any reaction. Were there people in the palace who could use the voice transmission technique? While he was puzzled, the voice continued, You're composed. Quite impressive for your young age. A man. The voice belonged to a man, but he was using a quite feminine way of speaking. Usually, such a way of speaking was characteristic of eunuchs. Mok Jae-un opened his perception and tried to trace where this sound was being transmitted from by moving only his eyes. Do you think you can find me by looking around? Mok Jae-un's eyes narrowed even further. The sound dispersed in all directions, and the energy that contained it also spread out as if bouncing around, making it impossible to trace. It was different from the voice transmission technique he knew, the general voice transmission. At that moment the voice was heard. It's useless to search. I'm speaking using the 6 directions voice transmission. 6 directions voice transmission? What was that? Did it refer to a technique that manipulated energy and sound in this way? Rather, according to Elder Biam's words, you have crossed the wall, but the energy I sense from you is merely at the peak realm at best. Elder Biam? From these words Mok Jae-un could make 2 inferences. They moved quickly. The only elder with the surname Biam that Mok Jae-un knew was the one he had seen at the inn in the heavy downpour. Since he had fully read that elder's energy, Mok Jae-un could discover that an elder named Biam was alive in the palace and that he was a eunuch from the Western Depot. He had noticed him being startled upon seeing him yesterday and hurriedly heading somewhere, but it seemed he had moved faster than expected. This person must also be a eunuch. He didn't know about other things, but eunuchs couldn't easily change the way of speaking ingrained in their mouths. That meant this person was likely a colleague or superior of Elder Biam. He had expected it to become troublesome, but they had moved faster than anticipated. Even before Mong Muyak could resolve it. At that moment the voice transmission continued. If that's the case, it means you're hiding your true martial prowess, right? This is perfect. If you have truly crossed the wall, show the skills befitting of that. Mok Jae-un slightly furrowed his brows. Show his skills. Here. Originally, Mok Jae-un had intended to leave marks on the Geok stone slab at a level similar to Seop Chun or Mong Muyak. There was no need to reveal his skills here. However, the other party made this request and it truly started to become troublesome. What should I do? The other party's intention was clear. It was literally to confirm his martial prowess. Of course, nothing good would come from being dragged along by this. However, the other party was also not someone to be taken lightly. If you ignore my words, you will immediately be disqualified from the embroidered uniform guard warrior examination for the crime of attempting to harm that person. If you don't want that, show the skills befitting of your level. At this voice transmission, Mok Jae-un's lips twitched with an expressionless gaze. It was no different from saying they would forcibly interfere with his affairs if he didn't showcase his skills. Isn't it the one sent by that old eunuch from the Western Depot and the woman he serves? Most likely. Seop Chun couldn't hide his concern at Mok Jae-un's words. Although he had hoped it wasn't the case, it seemed the woman that eunuch served held a high position. Otherwise, how could she mobilize an expert skilled enough to conceal his location from his lord using the voice transmission technique? If that were the case, that expert might be one of the top masters in the palace. So, my lord, if it's an expert of that level, we might be able to identify who it is. I'll have Mong Muyak investigate once the first round of the warrior examination is over. Investigating is fine, but there's no need to do anything. Pardon? But if we just leave them be, they will surely interfere even more. They'll approach us on their own anyway. Approach us? If they had thought of retaliation first, they wouldn't have come out asking to see my skills. 2 walls away from the senior training grounds where the embroidered uniform guard warrior examination was being held. There, a middle-aged eunuch in a red official's robe with elaborate patterns appeared, his hands clasped behind his back. As soon as he saw him, Eunuch Biam Jung, who had been waiting, clasped his hands together in a polite gesture. Chief Eunuch Ho. Chief Eunuch. It was an honorific used to address high-ranking eunuchs. There were only a few eunuchs who could be addressed as Chief Eunuch, and one of them was the Chief Eunuch of the Western Depot, the highest position. Eunuch Biam Jung, who held the position of Chief Eunuch just below that, asked, "What do you think after seeing it in person?" Although it was rude, his martial arts were so outstanding that it was difficult to approach. At those words, Chief Eunuch Ho frowned. Did it upset him? At this, Eunuch Biam hurriedly bowed his head and carefully said, "Of course, I don't mean to the extent of Chief Eunuch Ho, who is acknowledged as the best master in the Western Depot. No. He was much more outstanding than I expected." "What do you mean?" "He managed to find me." Pardon. Chief Eunuch Ho of the Western Depot turned his head away from the questioning Eunuch Biam and looked towards the training grounds. He still couldn't forget those eyes. Before he withdrew after confirming the fellow's skills and expressing admiration, he sent just one message using the 6 directions voice transmission. Indeed. At that moment the fellow accurately looked at him, who was hiding under the tiled roof of the building. The moment their eyes met, Chief Eunuch Ho couldn't hide his surprise. When using the 6 directions voice transmission, the sound and energy resonated identically from front, back, left, right, up and down, making it impossible to determine the location. However, that fellow named Mok Jaeongun had accurately discerned his location. This was the first time he had experienced such a thing. Chapter 237. The Disregard for the Embroidered Uniform Guard 6. Not long after, the internal energy measurement of all the trainees was completed. Seeing the number of successful and failed candidates, Commander Chai Ho-sung raised an eyebrow and let out a faint groan. Out of the total 103 trainees, the number of failures was 37. The successful candidates numbered 66. Far more had passed the internal energy measurement compared to last year's selection process. This is unexpected. At that time, Chai Ho-sung had participated as an assistant. Back then there were 48 successful candidates, but this time the number had significantly increased. It meant that the current class had relatively higher skills. Interesting, isn't it? At his words, the 6 commanders of the 6 offices officials standing below the platform nodded in agreement. Even before, outstanding trainees would occasionally appear. However, this class was particularly different. 2 trainees with martial prowess at the level of an embroidered uniform guard commander or above had emerged. Mok Jaeong and Ju Won-hyang. 2 individuals with a distinctly different feel. Neither of them was expected, but they had been hiding astonishing martial prowess. Moreover, since neither of them were pre-selected candidates, they were virtually strong contenders for the top scorer, first place, and second place in the embroidered uniform guard warrior examination. While Chai Ho-sung and the commanders were making similar assessments, only Commander Seo Yerin was observing someone. It was none other than Mok Jaeong-un. My senses is warning me. If she were in charge as the overall supervisor, she would have judged that he shouldn't be allowed to pass, no matter the reason. However, she quickly suppressed that thought. After all, she hadn't joined the embroidered uniform guard to enjoy wealth and glory or out of loyalty to the country. Unless he directly caused trouble, there was no need to pay attention. Commander Chai Ho-sung looked at the successful candidates of the internal energy measurement and spoke. I extend my congratulations to the trainees who have passed the first stage of the selection process. Woohoo! At his congratulations, the successful candidates erupted in cheers. Becoming a member of the embroidered uniform guard, the Emperor's Special Guard, was a great honor and glory for them. Commander Chai Ho-sung gestured for the cheering individuals to quiet down. As the hall became silent again, he said, however, this is just the beginning. From now on, we will officially conduct the embroidered uniform guard selection process for a month. The successful candidates focused on his words. It was an explanation of how the process would proceed. Before the second selection stage, we will impart the basic embroidered uniform guard techniques such as the arrest techniques, the gold silk hand methods, and the basic formation of the embroidered uniform guard for 5 days. There will be no eliminations during this stage. At those words, the successful candidates let out sighs of relief. It meant they would have a breather for at least 5 days. Seeing their reaction, Commander Chai Ho-sung smiled and continued. Don't be too happy. During the remaining month, you will undergo the embroidered uniform guard apprenticeship period, and we will continuously assign scores to eliminate failures. Gasp. Continuous eliminations. At this, the trainees' expressions darkened in various ways. It meant they couldn't let their guard down except for those 5 days. One of the trainees who had been listening silently raised his hand and asked, You mentioned an apprenticeship period, so how will it proceed? At the trainee's question, everyone buzzed with murmurs. They were hearing about the apprenticeship period for the first time. To this, Commander Chai Ho-sung said, This class can be considered lucky. What do you mean? At least before being eliminated, you'll have the opportunity to experience what the embroidered uniform guard does by going around the palace interior. The trainees buzzed at those words. They didn't know that the apprenticeship would actually provide an opportunity to experience being an embroidered uniform guard. Therefore, some trainees couldn't hide their excitement. Of course, such opportunities are rare. The embroidered uniform guard apprenticeship this time was entirely based on the opinion of the Director General. It was a process approved with the consent of the Southern and Northern Commander-in-Chiefs. Testing the trainees' practical abilities through an apprenticeship wasn't a bad idea. While the trainees were filled with anticipation for the practical field, Mok Jae-un's eyes flickered with interest for a different reason. It's as Ma Are-hyun said. It was as mentioned by Ma Are-hyun, the masked embroidered uniform guard commander. That meant he might have an opportunity to go to the underground prison sooner than expected as promised. This was the right opportunity. Since the explanation wasn't finished yet, Commander Chai Ho-sung continued. Do you know why the commanders of each office in the 6 offices officials came as assistant supervisors? It's to provide you with the opportunity to experience each office for 5 days over the course of a month. Ooh! The trainees erupted in cheers at those words. They were being given the opportunity to experience not just a specific office, but all the offices. The first office, which was in charge of the imperial family and the inner palace bureau, was the most preferred office among the 6 offices officials by everyone. Enjoy it to your heart's content. Pathetic bunch. They don't know that hell is about to begin. At their reaction, the commanders of each office inwardly sneered. Although it was an opportunity to experience each office, it could also be a grueling process with the highest elimination rate in the history of the selection process. Throughout the apprenticeship period, scores would be given as if under surveillance, so there would be a constant stream of eliminations. Before the 5-day basic embroidered uniform guard training, I will designate the groups for the first apprenticeship office in advance. Already. This is exciting. Please, the first office. I want to go to the 6th office. Everyone was filled with anticipation at the announcement that the groups for each office of the 6 offices officials would be determined already. It was understandable to be curious about which office they would be assigned to first. The most preferred offices were naturally the first office, which was in charge of the imperial family, the third office, which could be considered another corps of the embroidered uniform guard as the intelligence department, and the 6th office, where the exceptionally beautiful Commander Seo Yerin, known as the ice flower of the embroidered uniform guard, was assigned. Even if they rotate according to a set order, they'll eventually go through all the offices, so it's just shuffling the cards. While the trainees had their hopes, Mok Jae-un thought inwardly. It didn't matter which office they were assigned to first, as there was nothing particularly good or bad about it. In the end, they had no choice but to experience all the offices. Ultimately, the second test was to assess how well they adapted to whichever office they were assigned to and how outstanding their work abilities as future embroidered uniform guards could be. The 4th office is in charge of the prisons, right? Of course, he hoped to be assigned to the 4th office first. It would allow him to shorten the time even more. And it would be nice if the groups were divided. The ones he hoped to be in separate groups were Seop Chun and Mong Muyak. Although they had pledged loyalty to him, they strictly belonged to the Heaven and Earth Society. It was still questionable whether they would readily follow his orders even if they went against the Heaven and Earth Society. At that moment, Commander Chai Ho-sung, the overall supervisor, continued. The groups have been assigned based on the internal energy measurement scores, and the assignment to each office has been randomly determined by the commanders present here, so complaints will not be accepted. Understood. Yes, sir. And so the group assignment announcement began. Commander Hwa Young-in of the first office came forward first and announced the members of Group 1. Trainee Namgung Chung-hyun. At the first announcement, the corners of Namgung Chung-hyun's mouth, who had been calm until now, twitched. It seemed he also preferred the first office, which was in charge of the imperial family. Mong Muyak, who had approached beside him like Seop Chun at some point, whispered. It might be because Namgung Chung-hyun's sister, Nam Gung-hai, is a concubine of the emperor. A concubine? Yes. The Namgung clan has had ties with high-ranking officials for a long time, and it seems they had sent the eldest daughter of the clan head to the palace early on through these connections. I see. Hearing this, Mok Jae-un guessed why Namgung Chung-hyun showed such a reaction. It seemed he was happy because the opportunity to meet his sister had come early. Starting with Namgung Chung-hyun, the members of Group 1 were announced one by one. Yahoo! The first office from the start. I'm lucky. Naturally, the trainees who were assigned to the first office from the start cheered, unable to hide their joy. The imperial family's internal palace bureau was an office that everyone who aspired to become an embroidered uniform guard wanted to be assigned to. Fortunately, I avoided the first office. Unlike these trainees, Mok Jae-young had no interest in the first office. He only wanted the fourth office, where the underground prison was located. Since they said it was based on scores and Namgung Changhyun, who is in third place, was assigned to the first office, I won't be assigned to the first office. There were only 5 offices left, so there was a 20% chance. However, there was an unexpected announcement here. Trainee Mok Jae-young. Huh. They called his name next. At this, Mok Jae-young raised his hand without showing any reaction. With this, the group formation for the first office is complete. Mok Jae-young furrowed his brows. If they had considered the scores, the top 6 should never have overlapped. However, the fact that Namgung Changhyun, who was in third place, and himself, who was in first place, were in the same group, was something he couldn't accept. That would be the case if he were in 7th place. At this, Mok Jae-young stroked his chin. It doesn't seem like it just happened this way. Since raising an objection here wouldn't change the office assignment, Mok Jae-young quietly closed his mouth, although he was suspicious. And so the announcement for Group 1 ended. Since there were 66 people, they called exactly 11 names. Next, I will announce Group 2. Commander Si Wuriang of the second office came forward and started the announcement. The second office was responsible for the inspection and security of the internal and external palaces. It could be said that they had the opportunity to interact with numerous officials in the palace. Trainee Seop Chun. The first one to be called was Seop Chun. As the groups were divided, Seop Chun spoke to Mok Jae-young with regret. It's unfortunate. If we were in the same group, we might have been able to visit that place even faster if we did well. At his words, Mok Jae-young smiled silently. It seemed Seop Chun had also realized that there was an opportunity to enter the underground prison more quickly after hearing about the embroidered uniform guard apprenticeship. However, if they entered together, he wouldn't be able to carry out the secret mission from the Shadow Clan master. This was better. Trainee Jeom Jong-hyun. The next one to be called was Jeom Jong-hyun, who was in 4th place in the internal energy measurement. When he was called, he had an unpleasant expression. When Namgung Changhyun was called, he had also frowned, probably because he was in the same group as Seop Chun, a late-stage disciple from the Heaven and Earth Society. Who knows if it's good? Jeom Jong-hyun, a disciple of the Jongnon sect, belonged to the Righteous Alliance, so Seop Chun wasn't particularly pleased either. In the meantime, the remaining trainees of Group 2 were announced. Unlike the first office's Group 1, the trainees didn't particularly cheer or show signs of being pleased during the announcement of Group 2. Next, I will announce Group 3. Commander Oh Muji of the third office came forward and started the announcement. Many trainees preferred the intelligence department, so there were quite a few happy reactions here. Group 3 included Mong Muyak and 9 other trainees. Next, I will announce Group 4. Commander Mak Myung-ho of the fourth office stepped forward. As soon as they saw him, the trainees flinched. Among the 6 offices of the 6 offices officials, 5 offices had at least a few who preferred them to some extent, but the 4th office was different. The office in charge of the prisons. The 4th office managed all the prisons and criminals in the palace. In particular, there was a notorious place which was the underground prison of the palace. It housed everyone from traders to numerous heinous criminals from the Central Plains, and managing them was the responsibility of the 4th office of the 6 offices officials, so everyone avoided it. Please don't be chosen. It's not the prison from the start, right? Everyone prayed that they wouldn't be assigned to the 4th office. At that moment, Commander Mak Myung-ho of the 4th office opened his mouth. Trainee Ju Won-hyang. Yes. Great. The moment his name was called, a few people cheered. It was Yom Jae-young from the Hwashan sect and Wai Buchong. It seemed Ju Won-hyang had more enemies than expected. What a pity. Mok Jae-young clicked his tongue. He had wanted to go to the 4th office first, but Ju Won-hyang was assigned there. It can't be helped. Now that it had come to this, he could only hope that the next assignment would be the 4th office. Heh. Yom Jae-young from the Hwashan sect openly sneered at Ju Won-hyang. Although others didn't know, Yom Jiang had a reason for disliking Zhu Wenxiang so much. That was because at a gathering of Taoist sects he had been humiliated in front of the true persons of the Huashan sect, the Kong Tong sect and the Zhongnan sect because of Zhu Wenxiang. Damn that bet. Thanks to that bet, Zhu Wenxiang was acknowledged as a genius, while he was treated as a mediocre talent. Because of this, Yom Jiang greatly disliked him. He just wished for Zhu Wenxiang to not do well. And amidst that, when Zhu Wenxiang was assigned to the fourth office, which everyone dreaded, he almost let out a cheer in joy. I heard even the embroidered uniform guards avoid the prison because it's so difficult, so your assignment luck is bad from the start, Zhu Wenxiang. Yom Jiang openly sneered at Zhu Wenxiang. Then Commander Mak Myung-ho announced the next trainee for the fourth office. Trainee Yom Jiang. As soon as those words were spoken, Yom Jiang's expression twisted. Damn it. He had been sneering at that bastard until just now, so what kind of bolt from the blue was this? Why is that? Yom Jiang, unable to accept this, finally raised his hand and spoke. Then Commander Mak Myung-ho frowned and raised his voice. Didn't I say that objections to the group assignments will not be accepted? But, Trainee Yom Jiang, you're starting with a point deduction. What? Let me tell you in advance. During the apprenticeship period, if you receive 3-point deductions from us, the assistant supervisors, you will be immediately eliminated and demoted to an embroidered uniform guard trainee. Understood? At those words, Yom Jiang's insides were boiling. He raised an objection and immediately received a point deduction. Who would have ever imagined that? Any complaints? No, sir. If he argued further here, he would be the one at a disadvantage. Yom Jiang, who had received a point deduction and the worst group assignment, gritted his teeth and inwardly cursed Commander Mak Myung-ho. When the announcement for Group 4 ended, there was one person who was disappointed. It was Wai Buchong, the disciple of Gwi Saman, the sixth devil sovereign of the demonic alliance. Tisei. He had inwardly hoped to be in the same group as Zhu Wenxiang. That way he would have the opportunity to interfere with Zhu Wenxiang becoming an embroidered uniform guard or do something to him. However, Wai Buchong soon shook his head. No, it doesn't matter. There was no need to be in the same group. For a moment, a faint killing intent flickered in his eyes as he looked at Zhu Wenxiang. That day, after the group assignments were completed, the basic embroidered uniform guard training began in the afternoon. The basic training was moved from the Embroidered Uniform Guard Training Barracks to the Embroidered Uniform Guard Training Grounds, and the 66 successful candidates of the selection process were arbitrarily assigned to the dormitories there. Late in the evening after the training ended, the trainees dispersed throughout the Embroidered Uniform Guard Training Grounds. After finishing dinner, the time after that was free. They could go to the dormitories and rest, or they could use the individual training rooms in the Embroidered Uniform Guard Training Grounds. However, most of the trainees chose to train in the training rooms rather than rest for the upcoming warrior examination. In one of the empty dormitories, swish, the door to the dark dormitory room, where even the lanterns were extinguished, slowly opened. Through the gap in the door that opened with barely any sound, someone carefully entered, the face illuminated by the faint moonlight coming through the window. It was none other than Wai Buchong, the disciple of Gwi Saman, the sixth devil sovereign of the demonic alliance. As expected, no one is here. Wai Buchong lifted the corners of his mouth. He had guessed that the bastard and everyone else would be in the individual training rooms, and it turned out to be correct. Wai Buchong, who had entered like this, examined the 4-person dormitory room. Then, after checking the belongings placed on the table next to a bed, he grinned wickedly. Found it. Wai Buchong, who had found the place of the person he wanted, took something out of his bosom. It was a very small and sharp needle. Wai Buchong took out a few needles that were not easily noticeable, approached the wooden pillow on the bed next to the table and started inserting them. Hee. Wai Buchong covered his mouth and reveled in it. Imagining the owner of this place returning to sleep on the bed, he couldn't hide his excitement. If these needles penetrated the back of the neck or the head, everything would go smoothly. Wai Buchong, who was enjoying himself with such imagination, turned his body to leave and tried to take a step. However, the person I was waiting for didn't come, but a rat showed up instead. Startle. Someone was leaning against the door with his back turned. Wai Buchong, who had been staring at him intently, opened his mouth with a surprised voice. Could it be Mok Jayongun? The person standing in front of the door was none other than Mok Jayongun. Wei Buchong, who discovered him, couldn't hide his inner bewilderment. That was because he had entered after confirming that no one was in the room, and he hadn't even felt any presence while inserting the needles into the wooden pillow. But how was this bastard in the room? At that moment, Mok Jayongun sniffed his nose and opened his mouth. Forsythia fruit, sambac herb, goji berry root, centipede venom and dried opium. You prepared something interesting. Wei Buchong's eyes widened. He didn't know exactly what kind of poison was on the needles. All he knew was, since the poisons that penetrate very slowly into the body and even opium that causes hallucinations are included, this will affect the brain and make him gradually go crazy. That was about it. But he never expected opium to be mentioned from that bastard's mouth. However, the problem wasn't that he had guessed the poison inside. How did he do this? How could he distinguish the smell applied to those tiny needles from this distance? It was impossible without directly putting his nose to it. But that wasn't the important thing right now. The fact that someone had caught him committing this act was a big problem. At this, Wei Buchong tried to calmly handle the situation. Hey, calm down. What should I calm down about? This isn't a bad thing for you either. We may all be in a competitive relationship, but the most annoying existence for you would be this guy, Zhu Wenxiang. The owner of the bed was none other than Zhu Wenxiang. Wei Buchong thought Mok Jayongun would also be interested in what he was saying. Once we take care of this guy, there will be no one who can compete with you in the embroidered uniform guard warrior examination. Oh. The guy showed a reaction. Unless he was an idiot, he would know how beneficial this was. Things went well, it seemed like he could just let it slide. I've already laid the groundwork, so forget about the rest and just quietly turn a blind eye. Pretend not to know and let it go. Is that it? At those words, Wei Buchong grinned and said, Yeah. As expected, I thought there would be something that resonates between you and me. For now, it's a bit awkward to keep staying here, so let's go out and... Swish. At that moment, Mok Jayongun's figure disappeared from the door. Wei Buchong, who was startled, looked around and before he knew it, Mok Jayongun was standing next to Zhu Wenxiang's assigned bed. When? He didn't see it even though it was right in front of his eyes. While he was perplexed, Mok Jayongun extended his palm towards the wooden pillow on the bed. Then the needles that had been inserted into the wooden pillow came out and floated in the air. Void grasp. He knew that Mok Jayongun's internal energy was extraordinary from the first test, but he hadn't expected it to be profound enough to enable void grasp. At this, Wei Buchong, who sensed that something was wrong, tried to dash towards the door. However, before he could even do that, slap. Mok Jayongun suddenly grabbed his hair and pulled him back. Ack. For a moment he was about to scream in pain, but... Shoo. You need to be quiet. Mok Jayongun warned him. At this, the flustered Wei Buchong hurriedly said to Mok Jayongun, Why are you doing this? Who knows? Who knows? This isn't a bad thing for you either. You just need to turn a blind eye, so why? Grip. Ugh. Before he could even finish his words, Mok Jayongun pulled Wei Buchong's hair even harder, brought his face close and said with a smile, Actually, it doesn't matter to me whether you do this or not. It doesn't matter, but why? The problem is, a person who has enjoyed something once doesn't stop after doing it just once. No. That's... You don't need to try hard to make excuses. I'm the same way. What do you mean, you two? Once I've tasted blood, I can't control myself. Along with those words, the corners of Mok Jayongun's mouth stretched up to his ears. Looking at that face filled with nothing but malice, Wei Buchong's pupils trembled like crazy. Chapter 238. Primordial True Qi 1. It was a night with an unusually white and bright moon. Zhu Wenxiang, who was moving from the individual training room of the embroidered uniform guard training grounds to the dormitory, stopped his steps near the rear gate of the dormitory. What's going on? Two embroidered uniform guard warriors were standing guard under the torchlight at each gate. Since it was close to the morning, it was common for some of them to doze off occasionally, but it was strange that both of them had their heads lowered. Zhu Wenxiang approached them closely and examined them. Swish. He lightly touched them. However, they remained motionless with their heads lowered. At this, Zhu Wenxiang placed his fingers on the pulses on their necks. Acupuncture point ceiling. Acupuncture point sealing was a technique that could put the opponent to sleep or immobilize them by pressing specific acupoints on the human body, and these guards had been subjected to it. To do such a thing here. Although the martial arts of the embroidered uniform guard warriors weren't that strong, who could have been so bold to do this in the embroidered uniform guard's territory? Zhu Wenxiang slowly drew upon his energy with vigilance. Something didn't feel right. Snap. At that moment the sound of fingers snapping came from the corner of the wall. Turning his head, he saw the figures of two individuals in the darkness where the torchlight didn't reach. Focusing his energy to enhance his eyesight, their outlines became visible. Mok Jiangun? It was none other than Mok Jiangun, the late-stage disciple of the Heaven and Earth Society. But who was the one kneeling in front of him? The face was covered with something like a headscarf, so it was impossible to see who it was. However, the appearance of being subdued was utterly unsightly. What's going on? Already, his vigilance towards Mok Jiangun had heightened due to the incident during the day, and now he was perplexed about how to interpret this situation. At that moment, Mok Jiangun gestured to Zhu Wenxiang, as if telling him to come closer. He's bold enough to seal the acupoints of embroidered uniform guard warriors in the embroidered uniform guard's territory. No matter what, he'll try to make contact in some way if I avoid him. Although he didn't know what purpose that fellow had, it seemed like a situation he couldn't avoid. After all, they were staying in the same dormitory. Zhu Wenxiang slowly moved his steps towards that place. As the distance narrowed, Mok Jiangun smiled affably and said, "Finally, we have an opportunity to have a quiet conversation." An opportunity for conversation? So had he been waiting for him all this time? Although he responded calmly and nonchalantly, Zhu Wenxiang's vigilance heightened. How bold of you! Not only sealing the acupoints of the embroidered uniform guard warriors but also that fellow over there. What's going on? At Zhu Wenxiang's words, Mok Jiangun still replied with a smiling face. There aren't many places where we can have a quiet conversation here. So I prepared a modest setting, although it's not much. Prepared a setting? Yes, but someone tried to make an appointment first, so I had to make them yield like this. Tap. Mok Jiangun placed his hand on the head of a trainee wearing a headscarf and concealing his identity. Then the trainee who had been kneeling trembled. Judging from the reaction, he seemed to be terrified. Who on earth is it? It was difficult to tell who it was just by looking at the attire. But he wasn't particularly curious either. If he tried to save that trainee from Mok Jiangun's hands out of a misplaced sense of sympathy, it might lead to more troublesome matters. At that moment, Mok Jiangun removed the headscarf from the trainee's head. Why Buchong? He was surprised inwardly at the unexpected face. Why was that fellow who could be considered a pre-selected candidate from Prince Jiangjin's faction caught in the hands of that unsightly bastard? While he was perplexed, Mok Jiangun said with a smile. He had done something interesting to your wooden pillow. Something interesting? Zhu Wenxiang glared at Wei Buchong with eyes filled with suspicion. He seemed to be filled with fear, unable to even make proper eye contact. He was a disciple of Gwi Suman, the sixth devil sovereign of the demonic alliance, so he had acted more arrogantly than anyone else, as if there was nothing in the world to fear. But to see such a fellow making that expression, what did he do? Zhu Wenxiang opened his mouth, puzzled. It's poison. Yes, that's right. At Mok Jiangun's affirmative answer, Zhu Wenxiang clicked his tongue inwardly. He had known it for a long time, but perhaps because he had received teachings from the Demonic Alliance, an unorthodox sect notorious for its wickedness, he had become even bolder. To think that he would try to use poison on him in a place like this. I guess I really got on his nerves. Although the bastard kept glaring at him with murderous eyes whenever he had the chance, he had expected some troublesome incident to occur in the near future, but to think it would be today was quite a spectacle. Mok Jiangun asked with a puzzled expression. You don't seem greatly surprised? It's not something to be particularly surprised about. At Zhu Wenxiang's words, the corners of Mok Jiangun's mouth slightly lifted, as if he had found something interesting. I'm starting to want to have a deeper conversation with you. I don't. When he flatly refused, Mok Jiangun chuckled. Then he tapped Wei Buchong's head, who was trembling in fear, with his fingers and said, Don't be like that. Let's have a bit more conversation. Before that, what should we do with this fellow? It's a gift of sorts, so do you want to take him graciously? Mok Jiangun was giving him the choice. At this, Wei Buchong looked at Zhu Wenxiang pitifully and moved his eyes up and down, as if pleading for help. Please. Please. Although he had wanted to kill Zhu Wenxiang so badly, at this moment he was the only lifeline. This bastard was truly a fiendish fellow. Zhu Wenxiang, who had been staring intently at this sight, spoke. I refuse. It's a bit much to simply accept as a gift someone who tried to harm me. If you're going to give it as a gift anyway, I'd appreciate it if you could cleanly deal with it yourself. Proxy murder? At these words, Mok Jiangun said with a smile. He was even cunning enough to understand his intentions right away. If he was going to give it as a gift, he should handle it thoroughly himself to avoid any future complications. On the other hand, Wei Buchong's eyes widened as if they would burst out. What the hell are these bastards? He was on the verge of going crazy, caught between the two who were casually bargaining over his life as if buying and selling goods. If Mok Jiangun hadn't sealed his mute acupoint, he would have screamed or begged for his life, but there was nothing he could do. He couldn't understand how he ended up caught between these crazy bastards. At that moment, Mok Jiangun grabbed his head and neck with both hands. Proxy murder. You're quite calculating despite having someone who tried to take your life right in front of you. To refuse such pleasure. He was licking his lips as he said that. Seeing Mok Jiangun like that, Zhu Wenxiang took a deep breath. This fellow might be even more dangerous than he had thought. Zhu Wenxiang opened his mouth without showing any reaction, as if it was nothing. It's not like I have a big backing like someone else. Behind that fellow were the Heaven and Earth Society and Imperial Concubine Xiao. On the other hand, from Zhu Wenxiang's perspective, directly killing Wei Buchong would lead to troublesome matters. The guy was a disciple of Gwi Saman, the sixth devil sovereign of the Demonic Alliance, and belonged to Prince Jiangjin's faction. He wasn't even an embroidered uniform guard yet, merely a trainee, so if he hastily killed the bastard, there was a high probability that Prince Jiangjin's faction would make a fuss. Even if the bastard had tried to poison him. You're quite the exaggerator. All right. Then let's consider this my small gift. What? It was at that very moment. Mok Jiangun grabbed Wei Buchong's hair and tilted his head back. Then he whispered into the ear of Wei Buchong, who couldn't do anything due to the acupoint sealing. Do you know? When this type of poison enters through the skin, its effects appear very slowly. But there's also a way to make it work quickly. Wei Buchong's pupils trembled. Even the person who had provided him with this poison needle didn't know about this, so how did this bastard know? It was a moment of bewilderment. Stab. The poison needle pierced Wei Buchong's right eyeball. Arg. Despite the mute acupoint being sealed, when the needle penetrated his eye, the pain was so severe that Wei Buchong convulsed and even let out a groan. Even Zhu Wenxiang, who had been watching this scene, was at a loss for words for a moment. He never expected him to stab the poison needle into the eyeball. Wei Buchong's movements, who had been convulsing in pain, ceased not long after. But before anyone knew it, he had a dazed expression and was in a trance. Ha! Zhu Wenxiang clicked his tongue at the sight. Truly bold. That fellow's backing wasn't ordinary either, yet there was not a shred of hesitation in his actions. Mok Jiangun smiled brightly and said, Is it a satisfactory gift? He was smiling with a radiant face, but it was filled with nothing but malice. Dangerous. Really. Instinct was strongly warning him, telling him not to get involved with that bastard. While his mind was somewhat complicated about what to do, Mok Jiangun took steps towards him. Now that I've given you a gift, shall we learn more about you? Swish. Mok Jiangun's figure blurred in front of his eyes and instantly closed the distance between them. Fast. His lightness skill was beyond imagination. Zhu Wenxiang hurriedly leaped backwards. Pot. It was the silent shadow step he had learned from his second teacher. The silent shadow step was a body movement technique of the silent killing sect, one of the 4 great assassin groups. Although it couldn't be said to be significantly superior to the current body movement technique of the Kongtong sect, it allowed for such mysterious movements. Swish. Zhu Wenxiang somersaulted in the air while leaping backwards, going over Mok Jiangun, who was trying to grab him. Oh. Take this. Zhu Wenxiang, who had been rotating his energy in reverse before somersaulting, struck Mok Jiangun's back as soon as he landed behind him. Whoosh. The palm strike infused with rotating wind pressure aimed at Mok Jiangun's back. However, Mok Jeongun bent his waist while simultaneously rotating his body sideways, and then struck Ju Wunhyang's head and neck with his legs in succession. Bam! Thud! Ju Wunhyang, who was hit on both the neck and head simultaneously, crashed to the ground. It was so painful that he almost lost consciousness for a moment. Grit! Ju Wunhyang, who gritted his teeth, launched another palm strike with reverse rotation towards Mok Jeongun's ankle as he lightly landed after striking him. Whoosh! This time even Mok Jeongun couldn't avoid it. The moment it touched his ankle, Mok Jeongun's body was flipped over by the fiercely rotating condensed wind pressure and was sent flying. It worked. Even Mok Jeongun, who seemed to have reached the pinnacle stage of transcendent realm according to his estimation, couldn't withstand this power. But the moment of joy was short-lived. Mok Jeongun, who had been sent flying, maintained his balance with ease, let alone falling over. Tap. Interesting technique. What the? This bastard. Ju Wunhyang was dumbfounded. It was the reverse rotating true qi that possessed the power to almost turn the Jiak stone slab into powder fragments. It had struck his ankle directly, yet he was too unscathed. Well, he wasn't completely unscathed. The torn flesh near his ankle was slightly open and blood was flowing down. Mok Jeongun, who had regained his balance and stood upright, slightly frowned as he looked at the wound on his ankle. I blocked it with death qi, but a wound still formed. Death qi was the energy of death. It could scatter most ordinary true energy, but Ju Wunhyang's technique not only didn't scatter but also penetrated his death qi and inflicted a wound. Is it because of that energy after all? The energy in Ju Wunhyang's middle danjian was different from ordinary internal energy. It felt completely opposite to his own death qi or demonic qi. The corners of Mok Jeongun's mouth slightly lifted. I'm starting to become more and more interested in that power. With those words, he took steps towards Ju Wunhyang again. At this, Ju Wunhyang endured the pain and stood up. It's a labyrinth. This was a complete monster. To reach this realm at such a young age, unlike himself who had become strong due to various opportunities, he was a true genius. There was no confidence in defeating him. However, he couldn't just take it lying down. Pot. Ju Wunhyang, who judged that he couldn't defeat Mok Jeongun with his current skills, leaped towards the main hall of the 6 offices officials of the embroidered uniform guard while simultaneously trying to shout. At that very moment, Mok Jeongun's figure blurred and instantly reached in front of him. Crazy! He was even faster than before. Mok Jeongun, who appeared right in front of him, struck his Adam's apple with the blade of his hand between his thumb and index finger. Ack! He couldn't shout as he was hit in the Adam's apple. As he staggered backward for a moment, Mok Jeongun grabbed Ju Wunhyang's wrist with lightning-fast arrest techniques and twisted it behind his back. Then he placed his left palm on the immobilized Ju Wunhyang's chest. And he injected death qi into his activated middle danjian. Whoosh! The purpose was to find out what this unique energy in Ju Wunhyang's middle danjian was. It was at that very moment. Roar! The middle danjian in the heart area became heated as if a flame had ignited. The surging hot energy began to strongly push out Mok Jeongun's death qi. Mok Jeongun's eyebrows raised. What is this? Mortal, why are you doing that? Chong Ryong asked, seemingly puzzled. The energy in his middle danjian is completely pushing out the death qi. It was a phenomenon he had never experienced before. The energy of death scatters and weakens the energy possessed by living beings. However, this energy in Ju Wunhyang's heart, the middle danjian, strongly responded to the death qi and pushed it away, preventing it from approaching. It's the first time I've seen innate source energy with such deep purity and strength. Source energy? Did you just say source energy? Yes. Ha. At Mok Jeongun's words, Chong Ryong couldn't hide her astonishment. She too had doubts when Mok Jeongun said that Ju Wunhyang had an exceptional energy in his middle danjian, not the lower danjian. But upon learning that it was innate source energy with deep purity that opposed the energy of death qi, she could now be certain. Mortal. It seems this fellow has learned the breathing technique of the immortals. Chapter 239. Primordial True Qi 2. Mortal. Seems this brat has learned the breathing technique of the immortals. The breathing technique of the immortals? Chong Ryong spoke to the puzzled Mok Jeongun. Do you remember when I told you that the techniques for circulating energy in cultivation methods or divine arts originated from the breathing technique of the ancient Taoists? Yes. In the distant past, Taoist priests or immortals who had achieved deep cultivation practiced a breathing method to boost their source energy for longevity and ascension. Boosting the source energy itself, not just internal energy? Isn't source energy the predetermined life itself from birth? Yes. The energy of life is originally a predetermined source energy. That's why in the distant past it was called primordial true qi. Primordial true qi. It was the true original true qi that humans possessed innately from birth. In this regard, things like internal energy were called postnatal true qi as they were cultivated postnatally. Amazing. I heard that the breathing technique of the immortals, the method of cultivating primordial true qi, had already been lost even in Taoism a long time ago. Then this person has cultivated the primordial true qi that had been lost? The only energy that can completely oppose the energy of the dead, death qi, is that. At Chang Ryong's words, Mok Jiongun's eyes flickered with interest. Primordial true qi, which was completely opposite to death qi. Perhaps this was the reason why he had felt a strange aversion since the first time he saw him. To this, Chang Ryong warned Mok Jiongun. Be careful. Even if it's a weak energy, if it's completely opposed, it could be very fatal to you, mortal. Before the warning could even finish, the hot energy surging from Zhu Wenxiang's middle danjian caused a great rebound. As a result, Mok Jiongun's palm, which had been placed on his chest, was repelled. Seizing that fleeting moment, Zhu Wenxiang struck a palm strike infused with primordial true qi towards Mok Jiongun's danjian. Bang! Mok Jiongun's body bent like a shrimp as he was hit in the abdomen. It worked. It wasn't because he had been hit. The moment the palm strike touched his abdomen, it was to disperse it using the technique of harmonizing and blending. Crackle! The primordial true qi flowed out through the soles of Mok Jiongun's feet, and the stone on the ground cracked. Seeing this, Zhu Wenxiang clicked his tongue. He never expected him to disperse the palm strike so easily from this distance when he was caught off guard. However, the real strike wasn't this palm strike. With his other hand, Zhu Wenxiang unleashed the reverse-rotating true qi he had prepared and aimed at Mok Jiongun's heart. It's that technique again. Perhaps it was the technique with the greatest power among the ones Zhu Wenxiang had learned. However, it was his mistake to show the same technique multiple times. From Mok Jiongun's perspective, this was no different from kindly providing a lesson. Whoosh! At that moment, death qi began to condense and rotate in reverse in Mok Jiongun's palm as well. Sensing this, Zhu Wenxiang's eyes widened. No way. However, Mok Jiongun and Zhu Wenxiang's palm strikes collided. Bang! Simultaneously, a strong wind pressure erupted and cracks formed on the ground around the two. The moment of collision was almost a balance of forces. At this, Zhu Wenxiang couldn't hide his inner shock. How did he do this? The reverse rotating true qi was a very profound technique. It wasn't the type of technique that could be learned simply by observing. It required enlightenment of the true meaning contained within the technique. Yet seeing Mok Jiongun precisely imitating it, Zhu Wenxiang was naturally astonished. Tremble, tremble. The force rotating in reverse was in a stalemate for a moment. It was even more so because the energies of the two were completely opposite. However, no matter how opposite the energies were, there was bound to be a difference in strength. I'm being pushed back. Zhu Wenxiang's pupils trembled. As Mok Jiongun drew upon more death qi. Bang! Zhu Wenxiang's body was repelled backward. He flew several feet and rolled on the ground several times before coming to a stop. Ugh! Zhu Wenxiang, who had suffered internal injuries, vomited a mouthful of black blood. A monster-like fellow. He collapsed limply. This was the first time encountering such a monster. From the realm he had reached to his energy, everything was on a different level, so he wasn't an opponent that could be dealt with through any means. Cough, cough. Zhu Wenxiang, who was coughing up blood, staggered and barely managed to stand up. His legs were trembling. With his current condition after suffering internal injuries, it was impossible to even escape. Zhu Wenxiang raised his head and looked at Mok Jiongun. And then he was dumbfounded. Just a scratch. He was in such a state that it was difficult to even move due to internal injuries, while Mok Jiongun only had a small scratch on his palm. At that moment, Mok Jiongun, who had been staring intently at the wound on his palm, opened his mouth. That power you possess. It seems quite troublesome. What? I'm talking about primordial true qi. At these words, Zhu Wenxiang's eyes widened. How did this person recognize primordial true qi? primordial true qi was different from ordinary internal energy that could be cultivated postnatally, so it wasn't the type of energy that could be discerned through perception. At this, Zhu Wenxiang asked in a rather serious voice. What on earth are you? Who knows? That's not important, but I'm in a dilemma. A dilemma? I'm thinking it might be better to kill you now, considering the future. What? As soon as those words were spoken, he took steps towards Zhu Wenxiang. It seemed he was going to put it into action immediately. Even though he was approaching slowly, Zhu Wenxiang couldn't properly control his body due to his internal injuries. Step, step. The sound of Mok Jiangun's footsteps, approaching with murderous intent in his fingers, sounded like the signal of the underworld guard opening the gates of hell. And that signal quickened. Mok Jiangun leaped forward, intending to behead Zhu Wenxiang in an instant. Unable to avoid it, Zhu Wenxiang stared intently at Mok Jiangun, who was swinging his fingers with a desolate gaze. At that moment, smack, Mok Jiangun's fingers, which had been about to behead him, stopped precariously on his skin. Drip. However, due to the murderous intent condensed in his fingers, the skin was cut and blood flowed out. Zhu Wenxiang asked, puzzled. Why did you stop? You're quite peculiar. What do you mean by that? You're the first person to make such an expression before getting beheaded. What do you mean by such an expression? Usually, people would either be overwhelmed with fear and lose their senses or glare at me with resentment. Of course, they would also tightly close their eyes before dying. But you stare at me intently even at the moment when your neck is about to be cut. And with a very desolate expression at that. This was a first for Mok Jiangun. He thought all humans would be the same in the face of death, but Zhu Wenxiang was different. There was not a shred of fear towards death itself, and there was no feeling of resentment towards him either. There was only a gaze of regret. At this, Mok Jiangun asked, I'm curious about why you had such an expression. Zhu Wenxiang frowned at this question. What on earth was this bastard? He couldn't read his thoughts at all. He abruptly tried to kill him and then stopped for a strange reason. It's a meaningless question, isn't it? The power of life and death is in your hands anyway. Still, I don't know, so I'm asking. I don't know if you're playing with me, but after encountering a person like you, I absolutely don't want to make you an enemy. If I'm forced to do so, I'll have to desperately try to kill you using any means necessary. You're honest. There's no need to deceive when I might die anyway. At his words, Mok Jiangun lifted the corners of his mouth. It's a first. What's a first this time? Although that troublesome energy is annoying, I don't particularly want to kill you anymore. You don't want to kill me anymore? Yes, it seems like a very inefficient decision, but I don't dislike you that much. At Mok Jiangun's words, Zhu Wenxiang frowned and couldn't hide his bewilderment. Did this fellow really have a change of heart as he had said? Anyway, if there was a change in his mindset, it was also an opportunity to save his life. At this, Zhu Wenxiang carefully gestured towards the fingers with his eyes and said, Then can't you take this away? I haven't received an answer yet. What answer? Ah. Was he asking why he had such a desolate expression when he was on the verge of death? He seemed like a really peculiar fellow. Why did he want to know such a thing? It was incomprehensible, but he wanted to end this situation, so he opened his mouth. I just regretted that moment. You regretted it? I had resolved to change everything with my own hands, but I was about to become unable to do anything again. At Zhu Wenxiang's words, Mok Jiangun looked at him with peculiar eyes. They were clearly around the same age. But the way he spoke was as if he had gained enlightenment in life. That aspect felt very peculiar to him. At this, Mok Jiangun said to him, After hearing your answer even more. Before he could even finish his words, smack. At that moment, Zhu Wenxiang's figure in front of his eyes disappeared. Where did he go? Mok Jiangun moved his eyes and surveyed his surroundings. Then he saw a blurry figure charging towards him with tremendous momentum from the right. The speed was so immense that it was difficult to discern with the naked eye. It was impossible to avoid. Swish. Bam 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 bam. In an instant something swiftly brushed past him. Along with it, the vital points of his entire body were struck, and his body was sent flying limply into the air. Crash. Ugh. Mok Jiangun's expression stiffened as he fell to the ground. Not only was it painful, but due to the energy penetrating the major vital points, his body couldn't move. That energy was suppressing the death chi within Mok Jaeongun's body with a fierce momentum. Through this, Mok Jaeongun could tell. This was primordial true chi. It was identical to the energy Ju Wunhyang possessed. The difference was that it was primordial true chi that was incomparably vast and profound compared to Ju Wunhyang's. A chilling voice reached Mok Jaeongun's ears. Trainee Mok Jaeongun. As expected, you are a dangerous existence. The owner of that voice was none other than Commander Seo Yerin, the deputy supervisor of the embroidered uniform guard selection process. Thanks to that, Mok Jaeongun realized that his judgment had been correct. When he first saw Seo Yerin, he had felt an aversion similar to Ju Wunhyang, but only for a fleeting moment. However, unlike Ju Wunhyang, she possessed internal energy, so he had received this aversion faintly, but as expected, she had also cultivated primordial true chi. Groan. The primordial true chi that had penetrated his body suppressed the death chi and tried to penetrate his 5 viscera and 6 bowels. At this, Mok Jaeongun took a deep breath and transformed his energy. Roar. At that moment, black energy surged from Mok Jaeongun's body. It was demonic chi, born from gathering all the energy he had obtained so far, including death chi, into one. Whoosh. The moment the energy was transformed into demonic chi, the profound primordial true chi that had penetrated each vital point was pushed out and oxidized, rising like a haze. What? At this strange sight, Commander Seo Yerin's pupils, who had thought she had completely subdued Mok Jaeongun, trembled faintly.